The 20 car of Stephen Henhock would get the pole for race 7 of the 2013 HARC Pro Series season here in Watertown, Massachusetts. The 31 car of Pichu London was on his outside. Stephen Henhock would quickly get out to a lead on the 3 car of Mason Wood as Pichu London and the 31 car would fall back. Going down into turn 3, we would have our first lead change of the race as Mason Wood, with some help from the 31 car of Pichu London, would get by Stephen Henhock. As you can probably tell, this is a right turn and the previous turn was a left turn. This track is called 8 Bowl for a reason. It is basically a figure 8 that doesn't actually intersect itself. Here's a good angle of the figure 8 configuration of this track as Mason Wood continues to lead well until coming down into turn 3. Pichu London in the 31 car would dive to the bottom and get around with some help from the 22 car of Jacob Young. Coming down the front stretch, Jacob Young would get to the inside of Pichu London. Pichu London would lead the lap, but Jacob Young would take the lead in turn 1. Coming down to the completion of lap 3, the field had pretty much just maintained 2x2x2 until coming into turn 3, Pichu London and Mason Wood would make Jacob Young go up the track and Mason Wood would retake the lead. Coming down into turn 3, the same lap, Mark Nutt would dive to the bottom and get around Mason Wood on the inside line. Just seconds afterwards, James Davis would get alongside Mark Nutt and would get around him going into turn 1 and 2. James Davis would move high and would have not very much drafting help, and Mark Nutt would actually retake the lead on the right line there. So basically there is no optimal line at this track. It's basically pick whatever line that moves and try to switch lanes and get to the inside every corner. Mark Nutt would continue to lead as the front 5 or 6 continued single file until Pichu London and Zachary Brown went to the inside of him going into turn 1, and they would get first and second from him. At least that would be what they would do momentarily, as Mark Nutt, with some help from Robert Moss on the low line going into the right portion of the course, would retake the lead. Mark Nutt would once again lead for about another lap before Mason Wood in the 3 car would get to the inside and take the lead for himself. The second place position would swap many times in the next few laps as Mason Wood would continue in the lead, as Kyle Pulanini, who took over second place, decided to work logically and, stay in second place and draft with Mason Wood. Eventually, Kyle Pulanini would get shuffled back a little bit by Zachary Brown, Pichu London, and Jacob Young, and Zachary Brown would get a big run on Mason Wood and get to the bottom and take the lead. Coming down towards turn 3, Jacob Young would move high before diving low, and doing this, he would be able to outsmart Zachary Brown and take the lead for himself. Jacob Young would be able to hold off many second place charges, and he would continue as leader for the next few laps. You may have seen a crash in the back. That was Luke Walker and Peter Saviano making contact, which put Brock McMahon right in the wall, and Peter Saviano would slide down the track and right onto his roof. This would obviously bring out our first caution. The vast majority of the field, in fact, every car on track would take this opportunity to come in for their only pit stops of the day. Jacob Young, coming out of his pit box, would experience some contact with Nicholas DeFour, who was trying to enter his, and because of this, Pichu London would get out in front of him and would take the lead of the race. Trying to sort themselves out after pit stops, many drivers would have to check up and would accidentally rear-end cars such as this, and Eric Cesar would actually get knocked onto his side by Leah Walker. Many cars would actually get stuck on the between the apron and the racetrack. Meanwhile, Peter Saviano, who went upside down in the crash that brought out this caution, would actually get himself prepared enough to be let back out onto the track. Coming down for the restart, Ilya Bondarenko and Zach Harvick would have a little bit of an argument over who got in what lane position, as Ilya Bonarenko was trying to get into the lap down cars lane, but Zachary Brown wasn't, and he was trying to get down to, well, the rest of the field, the lane in which the rest of the field was to restart. The HARC officials decided to do nothing about this incident, and Pichu Lennon would lead the field back to the green flag. There are 3 cars off the lead lap right now: Ilya Bonarenko, Peter Saviano, and Luke Walker, and only one out of the race, Brock McMahon, who took a hard hit into the outside wall during the previous caution. Peter Saviano in the 33 car would be extremely slow. Well, he has roof damage from going upside down in the previous crash, but he's still legally out there, so all the cars would have to maneuver their way around him, and they eventually would, going into turn 3. However, there would be a big gap between this pack and the pack of leaders. This pack of about 6 cars has broken away from the field that was stuck behind Peter Saviano, and Dixie Normus has taken over the lead with some help from the 64 car of Ron Young. A few laps later, Robert Moss in the 100 car would get to the inside of Dixie Normus entering turn 1, but he wouldn't be able to get around her, and she would continue in the lead. Down the backstretch, Robert Moss would get another attempt at passing Dixie Normus, and this time he would be successful with some help, drafting help of Zach Harvick in the 30 car. As the second and third packs slowly began to regain drafting within drafting distance of the first pack, Ron Young in the 64 car would blow a motor and would eventually go out of the race. The lap after Ron Young went out of the race, the leaders would catch up to the lap traffic of Leah Walker, who was going 15 miles an hour slower. Robert Moss would give her a quick bump out of the way before getting around. However, Dixie Normus and Zach Harvick would be stuck behind Leah Walker for a very prolonged amount of time as the top 3 cars went around. This would help the second pack catch right back up to the first one, or at least a little bit. Going down the backstretch, the top 5 cars, who were typically running single file, just trying to conserve their tires and keep away from the second pack, decided to make it 3 wide for the lead. And Pichu London would retake the lead in the 31 car. 1 lap later, Zach Harvick would get a big run on Pichu London coming into turn 3, and he would take the lead with some help from Dixie Normus. And apparently Dixie Normus was tired of hanging back in second, and she would get to the inside of Zach Harvick and take the lead, as Robert Moss took a look to the inside, but decided to slow down and not make it 3 wide unnecessarily. You can still see the margin between the 2 packs is very large at this point. It's now Robert Moss and Pichu London are making it 3 wide for the lead. Look at Jacob Young through the middle, going from 4th to 2nd there. Robert Moss would continue with the lead. For the next few laps, the top 5 cars would run single file, just once again trying to keep away from the second pack until they caught up to the lap traffic of Peter Saviano and James Davis, who really just held them up. I don't know why Robert Moss just didn't go to the outside at first, and then he got stuck behind James Davis. This is really going to help the second pack catch back up, as now Pichu Lennon is trying to get to the outside of James Davis, pretty unsuccessfully right now, as he has no drafting help. And then James Davis would finally get out of the way of the leaders, and Robert Moss and Dixie Normus would get around him on the outside. The gap between the 2 packs would decrease from previous 4.5 seconds down to just 1.5 seconds. And with just 2 cars running out in front right now, they would, the second pack would completely catch up to the first pack. Now Dixie Normus is going to the inside of Robert Moss. This is the worst thing they could possibly be doing right now if they just want to battle amongst themselves, but apparently Dixie Normus thinks it's just too important to go for the lead at this point. Now that the pack is caught up completely, Robert Moss, who shook his fist out the window at Dixie Normus, would get to the inside and retake the lead with some help from Zach Harvick. We now just have around 6 laps to go. Richard Trelinsky, who was in that second pack that caught up to the first pack, would get around Robert Moss going into turn 3. Just 3 laps to go, Dixie Normus would get to the inside of Richard Trelinsky and take the lead for himself with some help from the 73 car of Spencer Ford. Just 1.5 laps to go, Dixie Normus and the other lead lap cars would have to negotiate Kyle Pulanini, who's probably the first back marker who has actually been pretty kind to the leaders this race. Just gave them the inside right outright and maintained his line on the outside. Coming down to the white flag, Richard Trelinsky and Connor Breton would get to the inside of Dixie Normus. Richard Trelinsky would end up getting the lead as Connor Breton would get second, as Damir Bejanoff and Robert Moss had to come into the pits as they run out of fuel. Heartbreak for them on the last lap. Coming down into turn 3, Gary Tang would get to the inside of Connor Breton as they are coming up on the lap car of Peter Saviano exiting the final turn. Here comes Gary Tang, but Richard Trelinsky just dives right at the last second around Peter Saviano. Gary Tang had no time to react and had to check up. And this will let Richard Trelinsky come down the front stretch and win his second race of the 2013 HARC Pro Series season here in Waltham, Massachusetts. Dixie Normus and Gary Tang would split Peter Saviano coming down to the line. Dixie Normus would get second, Gary Tang third, Nicholas DeFort fourth, and Connor Breton fifth.